opportunities out there, that essentially provides investment returns, it provides opportunities for business, and that ultimately leads to greater and greater financial independence. And looking at what you're going to be introduced to tonight, I really believe, especially right now, there's more opportunities than ever before. Todd, do you want to say anything different?
I think what's so important, though, those opportunities come with some self-responsibility as well, right? And you've clearly shown it tonight by showing up and learning as much as you can. But, the web kind of started as something that really gave us some core information. And I think it's gotten to a place now where you have to really sift through that to understand what's real and what's not. You have to have something to bounce that off of. And, in our case, a big part of it's math. If it doesn't work out mathematically, then it's probably a gimmick, and there's a lot of those in the financial industry, right? And so a big part of what has to happen is really look through all the things that you hear, whether we say it, anybody says it, and just make sure it fits in what you have. And I think when you do, you can see exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of opportunity without going down the road of the gimmicks, right?
So last thing I'll say before we get into it is, after you learn what you're going to learn tonight, I'm going to say you have a sense of stewardship, because as you look at over the last couple 100 years, the decisions financially come from information. And information always has an agenda behind it, unfortunately. And if you look at the banking world, banks aren't always straightforward. And oftentimes what they put in front of you is not entirely the truth. And banks are really successful. And I look at the system that we're a part of in the United States, in the world, in society, and we're essentially given instructions of what to do, and not necessarily taught to critically think through those decisions. It's very linear. And we'd follow those directions and told that we'll get specific outcomes. And those directions don't necessarily lead to our best outcomes. and so tonight we're going to essentially demonstrate that there are specific principles so that we don't have to take somebody's word for it. We can look at math, we can look at laws, and ultimately determine that okay, there are some specific things that are unbiased that we don't necessarily have to trust that there's an agenda behind it. We can trust that there are specific principles that are unbiased, that don't have an agenda. And that's what we've done over the last 12 months with these specific live streams is, okay, obviously I'm human. I have a company. I have a bias. I have an agenda. Same thing with Todd. But we've settled on specific calculators, specific principles that we've just decided to run our businesses that way. And what we've tried to do is base our education, our products, our strategies around that.
Yeah, and I think what's really fun about this whole topic tonight is it's so all-encompassing, right?
Yeah.
There's so many parts of this banking piece that have to do with legacy, they have to do with being able to take advantage of opportunities, having to be able to take care of families for generation and generation and generation. So this is really a big piece of all that we've been talking about for the last year, right?
Well, that's what I think the participants tonight, that's what you get to do, because as cliche as it sounds, we were joking of the Gladiator movie where it's like what you do now echoes into eternity. If you learn this, the impact you're able to make on your family, your kids, your grandkids, if you can establish these systems, establish these processes, your kids, your grandkids, and your future progeny gets a benefit from it. So let's get started.
Great.
Ready to go?
Yep.
And so we're recording this. There are moderators. You can ask questions. There's a workbook associated with it. We are actually going to do a version 2 in just a couple of weeks, and we are going to allow you to invite some friends, invite family if you want, and so we'll give some information at the end for you to do that. Okay, let me get my clicker and let's go. Okay, so here's a lay of the land. This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. So first off, we're assuming context which means we did some kind of macro content earlier this over the last 12 months. So the specific macro content was a live stream that was done in July 2024. There's a link in the workbook to that live stream. That was one of, I think, actually the longest live stream that we did. Kind of got carried away on that one. But it was, I think it was like two hours and 20 minutes. But that's the link is in the workbook. We're going to talk about the infinite banking concept and just kind of clear the air as to what that is, where our stance is now with regards to that concept. We're going to get into the principles of the family bank concept and juxtapose the infinite banking concept. We're going to talk about family bank roles. Then we're going to talk about some actual examples. Then we're going to talk about the family bank and what that has to do with legacy. And then we're going to talk about a prototype app that we would love for you guys to start testing. And if you guys, oh yeah, I actually put some QR codes in here. If you guys want to, I'll leave this on here for a second so you guys can get those. So that'll give you some additional information. Anything else you want to say before we get into infinite banking?
Well, we should invite Kim for the next one, right?
Yeah, I think she'd. No, Kim. Let's say some stuff about. Let's give Kim some kudos because she doesn't give herself enough kudos.
Yeah. And the Perpetual Wealth book that she's put out, and this is all a piece of that. And it's that idea of continuing the process. And you know, a big piece of what she talks about, and what we'll talk about tonight is, you know, money is a core part because it allows other things to happen, but it's not the part. And I think so often when people hear the word legacy, what they think about is the money piece. How much are they going to leave behind money-wise? And really a legacy is so much more than that. The money part, it just enables the real legacy in a lot of places to happen. And that comes from passing on who you are, what your principles are, what your values are, and a process or a strategy for the next generation to succeed.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, look. So Kim is. I don't know how she does it. She's written like 500 books or something like that. You know, I'd be lying to say that I love reading growing up. I think it's unfortunate that the school system that we're a part of. Again, this is where I think our education system. It's super unfortunate because it's a system that was based on a Prussian system that teaches people to follow instruction and to be soldiers and factory workers, and it doesn't make us curious about learning and expanding and about understanding how things work, and it's unfortunate, right? Because after I really became curious about learning and education, it was after school, right? It was after the school system was out of my life is when I actually wanted to read books and start learning, right? And I think that really, I can't remember what the statistics are of like how many books people want or read after college. It's like less than 3 or 4, I think, and it's really unfortunate. But the books that Kim has written, it's a labor of love, and all those books, the links are in the workbook. I'm working on a second book right now. The book that I wrote is in. There's a link in the workbook as well. But a lot of the material that you'll hear tonight has been written about, and obviously we're going to talk about some additional things tonight. But you know, Kim has put her heart and her experience, which is over 30 years, into these books, and so I would encourage you guys to continue to read. These are timeless principles. Regardless of what's going on, whether it's AI or crypto or what's going on in the government and taxes and fiscal policy, monetary policy, there are certain principles that will apply to life, both now and into the future. And so learning these and really understanding how they apply now, how they've applied in the past, and how they will apply into the future, it's going to be vital.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. All right. Let's move. All right. So let's talk. Oh yeah, let's talk about these two guys. All right, so A.L. Williams, I'm sure you guys don't know who this guy is. The second guy we're going to talk about is going to be important. But the reason why we wanted to bring this up is this guy is a multi-billionaire, and he's a multi-billionaire because of one singular event. And the event was his father passed away and had a very small whole life insurance policy. And because of that, A.L. Williams was very upset. He was very young at the time, and he decided to coin the term, buy term, and invest the difference. And he started a company called Primerica. Primerica was purchased by Sandy Weil for, I think, $1 billion. Then it was acquired by another insurance company. Then eventually Citi became a multi-billionaire and became a billionaire by essentially establishing really expensive mutual funds and the most expensive term insurance, which ultimately didn't help anybody. And all off of one singular event. Why is that important?
Well, it's hugely important. I think what happens is many times we get blindsided by a single event in this case, and we forget everything else, and it sends us down a track or a road of that one-trick pony, right? Everything goes this way, and you totally exclude anything else that doesn't fit in those parameters. And unfortunately, most of the time, there's exceptions. There are things that have to be entered in as well as that, and so you can't just go down a single road and say everything fits in this box, and it's always this way. And the unfortunate side of it not being that way is really the best answer that you can give somebody when they say, what should I do with my money, is it depends. If you're really answering honestly, that's what needs to happen. Until you get some data and some information about what it is they want in life, what it is that's happening to them in their financial world, it's hard to say what needs to happen until you get that information. And this idea that, no, everything is buy term and invest the difference, or whatever that one road is really dangerous because it can have serious long-term effects that you either missed out on or sent you down a road that you couldn't change on. Right?
And it makes sense why he did it.
It does.
It was super traumatic, and you can understand it, right?
It was heartfelt.
Ultimately, it was very myopic and ended up not necessarily benefited him, didn't necessarily benefit other people. Then this guy, right? So Dave Ramsey built and has still an incredible empire based on one singular event, which was his bankruptcy by being over-leveraged on real estate debt.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, all debt's bad as a result.
Is bad.
Because that's what he decided caused his problem, not the decision-making around how he bought the debt or whether the returns were going to cover the cost of the debt or whether the debt was fixed at a certain rate or any of those things. It just became all debts are bad. And again, it's that one single road that causes a loss of flexibility, a loss of taking advantage of when maybe that debt might actually fit and be a good thing in some places, right? We'll talk about it.
Okay, so this is our Nelson Nash. I don't know if anyone has spoken at more of his conferences than you have. I've spoken at a few of his conferences as well. So in 1981, what happened to Nelson Nash?
Yeah, so Nelson really he got over leveraged. I mean, it was similar to in a little different way, but kind of what happened to Dave Ramsey, right? I mean, all of a sudden debt was climbing through the roof, and so there was we saw consumer debt, or not even consumer debt. We saw real estate debt, business debt, in the 18, 20 plus range, right? And so all of a sudden it was, you couldn't cover those notes with your businesses, and there were a lot of businesses that had gone down that road, and they had this open-ended debt, and so it created some huge problems. And what happened with Nelson was he looked at that and said, there's got to be a better way, and he figured out, hey, with life insurance is one example. If only I had money in life insurance instead of these other places, I'd be able to take advantage of those lower interest rates. And so it really set him on a course of don't do business with the banks anymore. Absolutely, under any conditions, right?
So Nelson came out with his book in 2000. 2007 is when I discovered the book, right? And that's when I started Paradigm Life. You had discovered it, earlier than that. And I'll back up for 2007. So after 2007, I wrote about it in the book that I came out with. But I became really connected to Nelson. It's how I started Paradigm Life. I got to the point where I was part of a really close-knit group. I actually had to send bank statements, policy statements, policy illustrations to become part of this group. I had to prove that I was actually following the concept. And I traveled multiple times per year, was in very close conversations, and really understood his philosophy to the core. And when Nelson passed away in 2019, his core philosophy started to be twisted, and really looking at how it's become even more twisted on the internet, it's become unfortunate. Now, the infinite banking concept has a role, and it's super beneficial. There's so much value as you use it correctly. At the same time, it's myopic. And what that means is there is a ton of value at the same time as we have worked with clients and as we've seen their situations. There's so much value in whole life, and there's so much value in other aspects of whole life and other applications that if you don't really look at the application of whole life in those areas, okay, you're doing a disservice. And ultimately, what we've seen is not paying attention to that ultimately harms what we have set up for clients. And so as we've really taken on, whether it's the infinite banking concept, bank on yourself, velocity banking, vortex banking, cash flow banking, all these different names, we've taken a step back, and as we've, over the last 12 months, we've established essentially a principle-based, math-based, holistic approach so that when we evaluate a situation, even though banking, the family bank concept is a core strategy, we try to step back and look at it from a principle-based approach so that we evaluate things and approach it, essentially holistically so we don't miss anything. So when we set something up, we're not essentially or unnecessarily doing harm. So we're able to provide advice, provide direction, so that if we set up a family bank system, that we don't cause unnecessary harm.
Well, and it's those ripples, right? If all we're looking at is that one thing that it does, we miss out on all the other ripples that are beneficial that come from that, and looking at that strategy and how that fits in with everything else.
Yep.
And that's what's really key to having an overall strategy is how do all the things that you're doing fit together. And I think what happens in the financial world is most advisors only look at the one thing that they're doing. And yet everybody's financial world works in a way where one change in one area affects everything else. It has to. We have a finite amount of money, right? And so if we don't understand how those ripples, which may be huge benefits or they may be huge detractions away from the other things that we're trying to accomplish, then how are we going to know what it's doing?
And so this is where, again, the mission, as we kind of coined this, there's personalization, because every individual situation is different. Every individual is distinctly different. However, there are specific principles that are all the same. So what we've tried to do is say, okay, if every situation is different, what is the same? And how can we align what's the same so that we can make specific recommendations that will benefit people? And then ultimately, what is the outcome that we want for people? So the areas that we've discovered that we have taught over the last 12 months in these live streams: cash flow, protection, and wealth. And within these three pillars are specific strategies. And the outcome, okay, as far as whole life is concerned, as that foundation, right, is clarity, certainty, and control over your financial journey, ultimately financial independence. So we're going to demonstrate one of these core strategies. Obviously, we're going to keep doing these live streams because there's other core strategies, other things that apply, whether it's estate planning, income planning, business planning. But tonight is the fun one. Like I said, we're going to do a follow-up in just a couple of weeks. But tonight's going to be fun because we're going to do some demonstrations that, I think you guys will like. But also, there's some applications that we want you to test, because we really believe that establishing some of the habits that will come from these apps, habits that will come from properly establishing a family bank will change your family's life, because there's a lot going on in society right now, especially with the advent of advertising, communication on social media, that you got to be careful of, because marketers are getting really good, advertisers are getting really good, and it's pretty clear that there's a never-ending amount of things to buy. So,
Yeah.
and there's a never-ending.
Your
What's going
tape's
on?
kind
My
of
tape's coming
out there
out?
in the wild, yeah.
Oh man, sorry. I'm looking like a leper. All right. Okay. So family bank. All right. So let's talk banking 101. So what is that? What is
What are the
that?
biggest buildings, right?
Biggest buildings everywhere. What is that? What does that say about banking?
Banks are just making their little 1%, right?
Yeah. All right. So let's demonstrate. Let's do some math, Todd.
Okay.
You've been itching. You've been like dancing around over there, wanting some calculators. Uh-oh. What's going on here? Oops. I think I opened up Zoom by accident. All right. So let's look at some calculators.
And I think what we can figure out here, and what we can start to understand is how banks make money. I mean, the point is it's the arbitrage between what they're having to pay for something and what they're receiving back on the other side. And the general public, without a financial calculator, it's tough to understand really how they could be making the kind of money that they're making. Because when we look at, let's just say that they're having to pay 4% to somebody to borrow money. So they're borrowing money from consumers, and they're turning around and subletting that money back out to the public. And let's say that they're taking it in at 4.
So what does that mean? Let's
Yeah.
let's boil it down. So what does
Sure.
taking money in mean?
What it means is depositors, right? You deposit money in the bank.
So
the
why
bank's
would-
going to pay you to rent that money.
So why would somebody deposit money?
Well, several reasons, right? One thing is to earn a rate of return,
Okay.
and that's part of it, and to have a safe place to hold on to it rather than just sticking it in the sock drawer or somewhere else, right?
Okay, yep.
And so typically we want that so that we can have access to those dollars, but have them in a safe place where we don't have to worry about somebody taking it from us.
Got it.
Okay, and we do it for the earning side, but what happens is people hear, well, if the bank is paying depositors 4%, say on a high yield checking account or savings account, something like that, and they're loaning money back out at 5%, they're only making 1%. How do they build those buildings at 1%? And the reason is because you can't do that with percentages. You need to turn it into actual dollar amounts, and then I think you can see what's happening. And so if we base this on $100, so Patrick, let's say you go deposit $100 in the bank, and the bank's going to pay you 4% per year on that. How much are they going to pay you in a year's time to rent your money for a year?
So $100 for $4.
Right. $4, right? Okay, so in actual dollars, it was $4. Now, let's say I go in and I want to borrow money from the bank. The bank is not going to loan me their money. Instead, they're going to sublet your money to me. So it's just like if you had an apartment or something like that and you wanted to move somewhere else and you sublet that out to your buddy, you might make a little bit more than what you were paying in rent on that, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's what the bank's doing. So the bank takes your money.
All right, do the example again, please.
Yeah.
With
So
apartments.
so you put in $100. You deposit $100 in your account.
Yep.
They're going to pay you $4 to rent that for a year. I
Okay.
come along and I want $100.
No, but the apartment. Do the apartment. No, because this is why Airbnb is worth bajillions of billions.
Right. Well, let's
No,
say,
I'm serious.
Yeah. Well, let's say I get an apartment and I'm paying $2,000 a month, but I decide I want to move somewhere else, and I know somebody will pay $3,000 for
sure.
that apartment.
Yep.
Right. I could turn around and say, well, pay me $3,000. You can stay in the apartment. I'm going to pass on $2,000 of that, and I'll collect the $1,000 difference.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, the bank's doing that with money that they're taking in. That's the way they make their profits. Right. But it's the same as any retail business does. So
Yeah.
think about this. Let's say I'm in the hardware business.
Yep.
I buy hammers, and I pay X amount for hammers, and I turn around and I sell them for more than I paid for them.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
They
a
don't deal
markup.
with interest
It's a
rates. They deal
markup.
with actually dollar amounts.
No, they deal with the markup.
Exactly. Banks are just marking up money.
It's
the same
they
thing.
broker it. Yep. Agent.
All right. So they take your money and they sublet it to me,
Mhm.
and I have to pay $5 for the premium of doing that plus the $100, right?
Mhm.
So basically, the bank's cost in that deal is not the money you put in the bank, but what they paid to rent your money.
Yep.
And so all they have is a $4 cost to get $5 per year. Is what kind of return? 1%? I don't think so.
It's the markup. Yep. So what is it? Dun, 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 dun.
25%.
25%.
So that's hard to get your head around, but that is the way interest rates really work. And if we don't boil it down to the actual dollars, we can't see what's happening to us on one side, but I think even more importantly, what our opportunity is.
Yep.
Right? Because if we could do what the banks are doing, that's a quick 25%, right? And potentially without a lot of risk. Now, the bank does it at much bigger amounts than this because they're not paying $4 for all their money, right? They're getting money from the Fed. They might be paying 0.5% for it, 0 for it, and so their percentages go way on up. But you can't just add and subtract interest rates. They work on an exponential basis, and we have to look at what the actual dollar amounts transferred between the two. So the question comes up: why doesn't the bank put their $100 in there? Let's get another interest rate calculator, and we can look at that and we can see why leverage is important to a bank and can be important to us in our world as well. So if the bank put their money in the deal, when I came in to borrow $100, their cost would be $100, right? Not just $4 to rent money. So they would have $100 in the deal. So their present value cost would be $100 so that in a year's time they could get $105 back. What's the return on that? It's only 5%.
Yep.
See, so through the power of leverage, through the power of using money in a leverage situation, and it works just like a leverage in physics, right? You take a little bit, but with a long enough stick, you can move a lot with leverage, and that's what's happened here. They've taken what would be 5% and they've turned it into 25%, and it's the idea of OPM, or using other people's money. And so, it kind of brings that idea back to light of where Dave Ramsey is, and yes, he got caught. And he made a knee-jerk reaction that all debt was bad. All debt's not bad if it's used in the right way. Look at what the banks have done, and they've done that a lot longer than Dave Ramsey's been around.
Yep.
So if it's worked well for them, then maybe that's something that we can incorporate in our own lives, done the right way.
Yeah. Debt doesn't act. Debt is acted upon. So. All right. So that's kind of basics 101. So let's go back to the slide deck really quick. All right, so let's talk about banking families, right? So this is a really famous building in Italy, the Medici family, really famous banking family. They lent money to governments. You have the Rothschild family, also very famous throughout Europe. The Rockefeller family in the United States. Okay, so banking, there's parties, there's different roles in banking. You have the incentive of the saver, which is they get to pay, they get paid interest. They also get to store money. You get the spender incentives. They get access to liquidity without having to save it up, okay? And they pay interest back. And then the system has a degree of accountability, right? So this is what we talked a lot about in this 2-hour live stream that we did, last year, right? It's a really interesting system. It's been around for a really long time because it works, and it's been really successful for families, and it's also been really successful for institutions. But then you go and translate it into business. That's why Airbnb is successful. It's not banking money, but it's banking real estate. Same thing with Uber. It's banking vehicles. So, okay, the bank always wins.
I was thinking about that in your picture earlier in the previous slide. The house, the casino is kind of in the middle between two people playing poker.
Yeah.
Right? They're playing against each other, but the house pulls their piece of it, right? Yeah. And that's kind of where the bank sits.
But also it's the law of probability, right? Yeah. It's like banks have statistics and math and probability in their favor, right? And the other roles do not, which is interesting. All right, so this is again kind of a setup question. Okay, we're going to talk about the family bank, and we're also going to integrate the role of whole life, because whole life, obviously this is a rhetorical question. It's not necessary, but it is beneficial, and it will actually amplify the impact of integrating the family bank strategy in your family.
Yeah, but I think where this is really important to understand is we're talking about a strategy. We're not talking about a product, right? We're talking about the strategy of the family bank, and it's really an important thing to understand. You know, if you wanted to do it with a high yield checking savings account, then do that if that's what you really want to do. Now it turns out, and we'll look at that, most likely in most scenarios, a whole life policy is going to make that even better.
Yeah.
But the strategy of the family bank is what's really the critical or important part.
Yep. Okay, so as we talked about before, the myopic nature of infinite banking, it is an incredibly valuable feature of a whole life policy, which is the policy loan. But there are several other features that we're just going to mention before we get into the family bank concept. So the first thing is, when you set up a whole life policy, you are essentially financing your legacy from day one. There's contractual interest, there is dividends, there's contractual privacy, creditor protection, guaranteed cost of future benefits, critical illness, acceleration of death benefit. You optimize all assets for wealth distribution, asset replacement for business sale. Yeah, I used Canva to design this, and it didn't really translate well into PowerPoint.
Tier 1 asset.
Tier 1 asset for reserves. Additional disability insurance, bond collateral, and then finally the policy loan. All right, let's get into it.
And what else does all those things? See, that's the reason that whole life insurance at a core most of the time fits a lot of different scenarios, right?
And so our, again, the agenda, which obviously you guys are all clients, our agenda is to sell whole life insurance. And the idea behind it, and the reason why we dedicate so much resources and time and energy to education, is to be able to demonstrate the application of this insanely powerful product to a variety of different situations and scenarios. And we're going to continue to do that. But we do obviously sell other financial services, other financial products. But tonight, obviously, we're going to be demonstrating just other applications, because we know that your life is constantly changing, your scenarios are changing. And so hopefully this resonates with you, and you start to see additional applications of how you can use your policy for different purposes. Okay, so let's talk rituals and habits. So I'm going to go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, because, like I said, tonight what you learn makes a difference in the lives of, obviously your lives, but the lives of your kids, the lives of your grandkids, and the lives of those family members that aren't even born yet, because your actions are going to be producing results, and those results are going to be observed by those that obviously you're responsible for, and then they are going to be behaving based on what they observe in your life, and then those that they become responsible for, same thing, and it's going to carry on into future generations. So what we were discussing as we were preparing for this is there are financial transactions that have been taking place, even though the medium of exchange has changed, the things that are being purchased have changed, but the nature of that exchange hasn't changed, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So what we're going to talk about is the typical way in which things are purchased that hasn't changed, okay? And we're going to talk about what those options are, some rules for those options, and then how to best position your finances to make the best choice when those options are presented.
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
All right. The thing about it is we have principles, we have mathematical principles and facts that happen, and we have life. right?
Yeah.
And so, we have exceptions.
So that's what's in it. There's rules, principles, but then there's how do you navigate the actual, and that's the thing is like you have to navigate
Yeah,
because they apply differently in different situations.
they do. And I think one of the things that we ought to talk about first is what is one of those core principles of deciding, do we borrow money?
Yeah. So let's do the first rule.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
do we
Do we
borrow
borrow money or
cash?
do we use cash?
Okay.
Right? Do we use the cash that we have? What is the thing that determines that? It's actually from a pure economic standpoint. So understand, we're just talking pure economics first, and this is the base principle. What determines that is what rate we're either paying or getting.
Okay.
All right?
So
So what earnings rate or loan rate, depending on which side of the table
you
we're
got,
on.
you got earning. Let's just
Yep.
earning rate and loan rate.
Yep.
So why is that? Well, let's just define why that's important first.
Right, because
So earning rate. Are they the same or like how are they the same? How are they different?
sure.
Earning rate.
So
loan
earnings rate is on us is what does that money mean for us? What are we earning on it versus what are we going to have to pay to rent somebody else's money from the bank? Just like our example earlier, right? And so in that example, if somebody can only earn 4%, but the bank is going to charge them 5%, then really they should pay cash for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because their
Okay.
earning is less than they're going to have to pay.
All right, so let's do the rule because the rates work the same way. They just work in an inverse way.
Right.
Right? All right. So here's the rule. So if
Right.
if
Our earnings rate
if earning rate
is less than the borrowing rate,
if earning rate is less
than the borrowing rate,
than borrowing rate,
then pay cash.
pay cash. All right, so explain that.
All right. So if I've got an account that's earning 4%, but I'm shoveling money out at 5% somewhere else, I'm going backwards. Right? So instead of doing that, I should just take money out of my 4% account
Okay.
and pay for that 5% thing or whatever it is that's costing me more. And that from a pure economic standpoint is going to get me ahead. Now,
Okay.
if we switch that around and now I'm earning more than the bank is going to charge me to borrow money from them, then it makes more sense for me to leave my money earning that higher rate
Okay.
and borrowing cheap money from a lending institution.
Okay. Now again, so we want to be clear, okay, first. These are general
Pure
rules.
economics.
This doesn't mean that this is what you're going to do,
Right.
but it's just a general economic principle, okay?
Right.
So hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but it's a general economic principle. All right. So let's do the second rule. So what's the second rule? It's the opposite, right?
Right.
Okay.
The second rule is, like we said, when earnings rates,
Net.
net earnings rates, right.
So what does
And
net
that's
mean?
important.
So what's
net
net?
is after all costs. Because when we go to a bank, we're looking at a rate that is going to be net of all costs.
All right,
so we
what
have
is
to
that?
compare net to
so
net.
what are typical costs?
So costs on earnings could be taxes is always a big one.
So
And-
taxes is income taxes, gains taxes. Okay.
Right. Versus and fees are another one. Some particular investments also have fees for that to happen. We might have somebody, have to pay a manager, or in the case of rental property, we might have to have a management company handling it, or
sure.
we might have to pay for maintenance or whatever else is there, right?
But also you have, volatility, right? So you have if you have the probability of loss, right? It's like
Yep. The
sometime-
cyclic, it's not the same as the average, right?
That's true, right? Average versus actual. Okay, so all right, so when net earnings rate
Is higher
is
than the cost of borrowing, or the
borrowing rate,
net rate of borrowing.
And you also have to look at borrowing rate, because sometimes there's a
There
net
could be
borrowing
some
rate,
fees,
which
sure.
could be, there could be fees, but there also could be tax deductibility,
Right.
right?
So there could be some advantages there.
Yep.
And that really plays a big role. I mean, just as an example, on our home
Home mortgage.
mortgage, right?
Yep.
And so for a lot of people, they look at that.
Or a business loan
Yeah, they look at the size of the loan.
or a student loan.
Yeah, they look at the size of the loan to drive the decision of whether they apply extra money there.
Yeah, it's one of those like, so that I was
It's
reading
an
an article the
emotional
other day.
decision.
It's like, I was reading, why does Mark Zuckerberg have a $1 million mortgage on his property? It's like, because there's a cap on, interest in California.
Yeah.
It's because they get a tax deduction on the mortgage interest. All right, so borrowing rate. So what do? When net earnings rate, tax and fees, is greater than the borrowing rate,
Then you borrow.
borrow.
Okay. Again, from a pure economic standpoint.
Okay, all right. So that's rule 2. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so there's
And in this scenario, think about it. Why, if you were earning 10%, would you want to take money away from that to pay 4% debt, let's say?
yeah.
You'd want to leave that alone because you could take the earnings off your 10% to pay that other note. And so that's the way we have to kind of keep track of it. And again, that's just the big picture and initial piece. But there may be reasons that we violate these rules.
Okay.
Depending on what happens in life. And it happens all the time for investors. And if investors are doing it, maybe it's something that personally we should do it. So as an example, let's say a real estate investor runs out of money near the end of a project. They're putting in a mall or putting in an apartment complex or something like that. And it's going to potentially come apart. They might pay
High interest for
huge high interest rates for just
for a month.
a few months.
Yep.
Right? But that gets them past the hump, and it's the income that's going to come after that that's going to make up for that and make the whole deal work out. And so in our own lives, there might be situations where that happens. For example, we might have a situation where there is a deal available for us to take advantage of today. But the cost of money today may be a lot higher than what we could borrow it for later on or get it from another source. So in order to make that deal happen, we might violate that rule and take expensive money to make that happen, knowing that we have a month or so to move that off to some cheaper debt somewhere. So an example, might be any kind of loan that we could get right off the bat. And if we're in a position of cash with a life insurance policy, that could be huge, where we borrow from the insurance company to make the deal happen, but then we might finance it with a bank because we can get a lower rate and maybe a deduction or other things there, depending on what the investment's
let's
for.
let's take a step back. So let's list again, going to the purpose of this conversation. We want to list out what are the types of ways that you're going to make purchases, and not right now, but what's existed in the past, what's going to exist in the future, right? So I would say the first way is going to be cash. The second is going to be, I would say, a loan. What's the third? There's going to be multiple. Okay, a lease.
We could take it from investment, or we could take a lease, yep.
Margin.
Which is basically putting our investment up for a loan as collateral to cover what it is that we're trying to do, because what we're doing may not have much collateral, right?
Yep. Auto. So I guess you can say like secured loan.
Sure.
And then unsecured. Then you have student. What are other? You can have real estate, business. I think right now the more common ones are buy now, pay later. If you look at Klarna, what are some of the other ones?
PayPal has it
Affirm.
now where you can do it too.
No, well, you have Affirm, Klarna, and I think it was Afterpay. Collectively, I think they're worth like $70 billion, their market cap. All right. So the reason why we're showing all of this, right, is because this is what our current society is being subjected to as far as how they're purchasing. And looking at banks, these are the reasons why they have the biggest buildings in every major city in the entire world. We just demonstrated just some small examples of why they're so successful, and their functions are what you can essentially apply to your specific family. Now, we've given you some rules, okay? There's a lot of ways in which you can approach, different transactions. For the sake of time, let's just get into a few transactions. Okay? So what we've done is we've actually put together some illustrations, and we're going to start using some life insurance policy loans. But what we've done, instead of using adult policies, we've actually just established children policies. Because what we wanted to do is look at, okay, how can we establish something really small, okay? And the reason why we did it is because if you establish habits young, those habits can become more of a mindset and way of looking at bigger transactions, which become ways of looking at bigger transactions, which can then transform families.
Yep.
Okay? So what
And
I mean
it's
by
got to start
that,
somewhere, right?
what's that?
And it's got to start somewhere. Somebody's got to break that cycle and
Yeah.
create what's happening.
So that's the idea as far as a family is concerned, right? So if you have kids and you have their mind, they're most subjected to viewing the world and establishing that paradigm of the world at a younger age.
Yeah.
They're observing how money works, how their parents look at money, how their family looks at money, and that's established here, okay, at maybe 5 to 7 years old, and then that carries into the 10 to 12 years old when they want things, okay? And then that carries into the 15 to 18 when they start to go to school. That carries into when they're young adults, okay? And they want to buy their first home when they get out of college, and so on and so forth. So we're going to actually do some transactions and show, okay, if you establish policies at this age, and let's say it's just grandparents establishing policies on these, on a couple kids here, what does that look like on small transactions that lead to bigger transactions, that lead to bigger transactions, that lead to really big transactions?
Yeah.
Want to do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the things to talk about, to look at this, is think about this kid that hasn't had any of this understanding. They haven't used any of this along the way.
They're going to be subjected to all of that other crap that's going on. And who knows what's going to exist in 5 to 10 years.
Right, because when they come out here, all of a sudden they're having to make those big decisions, and they haven't made any little ones yet.
Yep. Okay, so which one do you want me to pull up?
What I'd like to look at is the first borrowing strategy. And we can just look at this on, actually, that's not the right case file. It's the second one that I sent you.
Oh, I don't know if I pulled that one up.
Oh. So bear with us just a minute. But just going over what, it may be in your email.
Okay, let me pull up my email quick.
Yeah. So when Patrick gets there in just a minute, what he's talking about is we're going to have a case file here where grandparents buy policies of $5,000 per year on 3 children,
For
a
10
10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and these are 10-pay policies. So at the end of 10 years, those policies are done, guaranteed to be finished with premiums, and they continue to grow, these whole life policies. But what happens is if we can start to understand the use of those, and as a parent and a grandparent, being able to instruct the children on, rather than just giving them things that they want, is actually having them buy it and go through that process and understanding a little bit about how monetary value works, and they'll get a lesson that then carries on, so that when they get out of college, all of a sudden they're already ready. They already understand how the idea of banking works.
And I think, I think that the typical response when you look at kids seeing commerce, right? Especially when they're, these days it's like a card gets swiped. They look at things, on the internet. They look at things at Target, and it's like this way. Well, why can't you just swipe the
All
card?
right.
Why can't? And I get this thing,
Yeah.
right? They don't understand that there's like effort and things that go into actually being able to have something of value. Like value has to be earned in order to exchange it for something of value.
Well, and the thing about money is, if you think about it, it's a value of labor, right? But if you're a child that's never worked for anything, how can you say, well, a dollar is, this amount of time that I've had to do something, and so you can't convey that in a way that makes sense. Really. A lesson would be to go back to the barter system
I know.
initially, right? Just at least to get some training. And that's ultimately where money was supposed to come from. It has no value in and of itself, but it's a value of labor if we can translate that. And the only way to do that is to teach that to the kids, right? Is to say, okay, you get paid X for doing this, and this cost X, or 2X, or 3X, or whatever that is, so that they have to figure out that core relationship. And I think that'll change the idea of the way people spend money, right? But it's got to start somewhere. Were you able to find it?
No, it's like hold on, just give me 1 second. My email's not pulling up.
Well, we'll get it here in just a second, but
Come on, buddy.
internet decided not to be cooperative.
What the heck?
Well, let's just look at the second ones.
Okay.
Do you want to just look at that case file and we can
Yeah. That's the strangest thing.
All right. So what we're going to look at is after that time frame has been established, and then we can start using those policies. So those policies have been growing for a period of time. Now then the first child is going to start borrowing some money to handle some of the student costs, some of the school costs.
Right, hold on.
Technical issues.
There we go.
It's already open, isn't it?
Yeah. This is why we need Kim.
Yeah, this is where Kim would play a great role, right?
All right, here we go.
Okay. So is this the second one or the one?
It's the first one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just go to the borrowing strategy 2. So ideally, what's happened in those policies on the younger ages is when they decided they wanted an iPad, rather than just giving them an iPad, they borrow against the family bank, right? And the requirement is that it be paid back at some interest rate. And I think, Patrick, what you've established is every loan's going to be paid back at 8%.
Yep.
Right? And so even though the insurance company's not charging that amount, it starts a habit of understanding there's value for having access to dollars. And to have access to dollars that you don't have to have on your credit score, that's not reflective on any bank statement, is super valuable above and beyond what that debt cost is, or what that interest cost is.
Is it this one right here?
No. Actually, this is what we were looking for.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you pulled up the right one. Cool.
Right here?
So let's go to the first one. All right, so we can even talk about this. So let's say that in this process, we're in the 5th year of these policies. So again, they were purchased on a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old.
So there's 3 separate policies.
There's 3 separate policies with a total premium of all of them of $15,000.
Yep.
Okay.
And they're 10 pays, right? All offset, so there's no premiums past 10 years.
Correct.
Okay.
And if we look at this in the 5th year, what we see is these policies have grown to about a base of about $41,000. And let's say that iPads are, we can buy 3 iPads for $1,000. All right. So rather than just giving them to the kids, instead having them buy it and creating a job. So what kind of jobs could we do?
Yard, mowing lawn.
Even for the neighbors, right?
Yeah, even for the neighbors.
Cleaning cars.
Yep.
Whatever. I mean, there's a whole list of things that could be created.
Yeah, the principle of it is doing something of value, right?
Yep.
Because what happens is, instead of having something for nothing, right, it's value for value. And in the process of doing that, what's the connection that's made? Even if it's for the 5-year-old. The 5-year-old, they sweep the floor, right? Or they dust the countertop, right? They do a chore, they vacuum something. Value for value. They do something that is reciprocated with money that then gets exchanged for paying off a loan. Then there's interest. So they actually work because they're paying off an iPad that they got, which is something of value.
And it comes in a bunch of different scenarios. Is that iPad going to be more valuable to that child if they knew they had to pay for it?
It is. It is, right? There's something for something instead of something for nothing.
Yep. And I think the other piece to that is the child doesn't get paid for cleaning their room. They don't get paid for things that are required of them for living in the house, right? It's those extra things. And that's what needs to be figured out as to what are those extra things that they can do to earn that extra bit of money. Mm-hmm. And now the reward is they got something for that labor, right?
And it's interesting too is when you get paid and then you buy something, but when you buy something and then pay it back, right, then you have essentially the banking function.
Right.
Now, part of it, again, going to a banking system where there's a note, there's interest, and then also there's obviously repossession where you have to make payments and then there's consequences if you don't.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what you've put together on the app, not the punishment for it, but at least a layout of what those payments are going to be.
Yep.
So a way to be able to determine that.
Yep, and we'll show that app in just a second.
All right, and so maybe next time, so now then we go down the road and, okay, now then the kids all want new bicycles. Okay, so how do we handle that? Well, again, we have $500 a piece for the bicycles, so $1,500 in bicycles, and that gets paid back. At what rate?
8%.
8%. Now, the insurance company is not charging 8. Why are we paying 8 back?
Mm-hmm.
Because,
well, again, so let's talk about the notion of interest, right? So why is interest charged?
Use of money. It's a valuable tool that, again,
it's an interesting notion, right?
It is.
Because what interest essentially is value,
right?
Right. So what's the value?
Well,
right?
Having money now, it's about immediacy.
Yeah, it's the value of the loan. So why is the loan valuable, right? First off, is there a qualification of this loan? Not really. There's no credit check, right? It's given
maybe internally in the family, right?
And so the idea is like 8% represents the value of a loan.
Yep.
Okay, and who is it benefiting? It's benefiting the family.
Right.
Right. And so again, you got to look at, the 8% is in a sense, somewhat ambiguous, but 8% is kind of what we use in our family.
Yeah.
So at least what I use. All right. So that's 8%.
Now we buy
ski
gear.
So again, all of this it just represents what it could be ski gear, it could be bike, it could be a vacation. And obviously there's capacity here. Now, this could be a typical family, but some grandparents could set this up for a family. They could establish the rules, they could establish the principles, okay? They could establish the first transactions.
And think about this, internal in the family, credit responsibility. Like, you mentioned it earlier, do you have credit responsibility? Well, yeah, I mean, if you're not paying it back on time, that may influence whether the grandparents allow you to be able to borrow the next time things come around, or maybe they do it at a steeper rate to teach. Isn't that what happens to people if they're not good, if they don't have good credit, so they're not a good risk for the banks, they charge them a higher interest rate.
Yep. Now this also teaches stewardship, but I also feel that when it comes to value creation, it engages a specific part of the brain that's creative, and they look for opportunities to be valuable
Yep.
that they wouldn't have looked at before. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does.
So e-bikes.
Yep. So just another
And the list
another
goes on
piece.
and on.
But it's all training on these small pieces for what's coming when those numbers get
So
bigger,
these are the phases, right? So here, and this is where we go back to the PowerPoint. This is the consumptive phase, right? The consumptive phase is really where, I don't know, there's a dopamine effect where it's like, this would be nice to have, this would be fun, this would be the exciting piece, right? Which is that phase of life. But then you go to the productive phase. So in the PowerPoint, right, these rituals and habits, that's why habits, they form ways of doing things, and that creates that paradigm, that perspective, that way of viewing the world. So that's family governance. I don't know if we want to get into this piece right here. This was
from time.
Yeah, for the sake of time, this is just.
But it is interesting. I'll just talk about it on the surface. We won't go through the math. How's
if you want to show the PowerPoint really quick.
Well,
this.
So here, what happens is this is some of the shadow costs, right?
And the reason why we want to show this is because as you establish what we just mentioned, which is the iPads and the bikes and the it could be skis, it's like having this alternative, having these ways of making purchases. When kids learn this, they go into what society presents as ways in which you make purchases. They are going to be able to scrutinize crap like this, because this is the 0% APR, the 1.9% crap, employee pricing plus. Chrysler can get away with this shit, and they can see. This is what we can say when Kim's not here. We can actually use curse words. Okay, they can get away with this stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Well,
this can pass, right? This can pass legally, even though this is not true.
But why is it not true?
You tell me. You designed the software that can tell us why it's not true.
Right. Well, so this is put out. This is an actual thing, and this all goes in cycles. All the manufacturers do it. They have their 1.9% financing, 0% financing. But think about this from a logical standpoint. Even before we see this, I mean, how does a car company loan money at 0%? Oh, they sell a lot of cars. No, that doesn't work, right? but that's what you'll hear sometimes, right? No, it's because they're playing games. They're playing games with financing, and you're not typically going to see this with the bank. They have more scrutiny around them. But what happens here is, I mean, look at the offer number 2 and offer number 3, and that's where the real difference is. It's you can get 0% financing or $5,500 off of the price of the car, not one or the other. So wait a second.
Let's run. You want to run the math on it?
Well, we can, sure. So
Okay.
So what's actually happening is they're just adding $5,500 worth of interest to the price of the car and calling it 0%, and that's not
true.
That's not true.
Okay.
So let's look at it. I need a payment calculator first.
Oh, I can use my mouse. Hold on.
And this is a $36,000 car. So minus $36,000 in our present value. We want 0 in the future. And it's going to be a 0% rate because there's 0 in the future because we want to pay it off, right? And let's change it to monthly. And it's going to be over 72 months. So that was the deal. That means our payment is going to be $500. Exactly. All right. So let's get an interest rate calculator now. And let's put in minus $36,000 as our present value. Again, it's a loan, so it's negative money that we have. We're going to put in a $500 payment to have 0 in the future over 72 months. And it shows us that in that transaction, that is, in fact, 0%, right? But wait a second. If I don't take this deal, I get $5,500 off the price of the automobile. So let's think about what that looks like. That means if I go to my banker instead of here, I don't have to pay $36,000 for the car. I only need $30,500. So if we change it to minus 30,500 and my banker charges me the same $500 that the car company was going to charge me at 0%, what does my banker have to say on their truth in lending statement as to what they're charging me in interest? Let's put minus 30,500, which is the 36,000 minus 5,500.
Do it again.
So minus 30,500.
Minus 30,500.
Negative.
Oh. Minus 30,500.
Is 5.62%. So why is the same $500 payment with the car company 0, but if I do it with my banker, my banker has to call it 5.62? And 5.62 is not a bad rate, but the point is it's not the 0 that the automobile manufacturer told me that it was. And so they're not telling us the truth in every scenario. And we have to look at all those pieces. And when we're talking about cars, there's almost always a rebate. It may be hidden. This one's actually published.
All right, so this is our first tease for tonight. So we made you guys an app, and we're going to give you a link to this in just a little bit, but it is a vehicle optimization application. So when you guys go buy your next vehicle, you can go in and it has all the makes and models, and you put the purchase price in, the down payment, trade-in value. It has built-in depreciation. You can do bank loan rate, dealer finance, manufacturer rebate. You can put in all the lease terms, and it'll give you essentially the best way to purchase it. So
this is amazing, Patrick, that you put together. This is really huge.
So we'll get, it's in the links in the workbook, so you guys can get that.
The one thing I'd caution you on this, just like when you go in and talk to the automobile manufacturer, say, no, I don't want your financing. Tell me what your bottom line cash is, because I'm going to go to your competitor and find out what their bottom line cash is, because they're going to have a different price whether you're financing it or whether you're going to pay cash for it.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right, let's go back. Where were we before? I'm losing track.
All right, so we need to look at the next phase.
Oh yeah, we gotta go next phase. All right, so where are we going? So we finished all the iPads and skis and whatever. So we're gonna go to production. So do you want to go back to the PowerPoint to go through production?
Sure.
Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so we're past employee pricing. We did the purchase optimization, production.
This is really an interesting slide.
You want to go through Berkshire?
I think it's important to talk about it. So this is interesting because it's Berkshire Hathaway, and it's extremely large.
Because it leads into production, right? It's going to lead into the, maybe not necessarily the 10 to 12 years old, 15 to 18, but maybe post, college, getting into adulthood. Okay.
But the principles hold true. So you have Warren Buffett, who's the guru, right?
Not anymore. He retired. He's done. He's done. Yeah. But still, Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most notable.
Right, and he hates bonds.
Yeah.
Right, but
he loves liquidity.
He still understands the value of having that cash portion or that certainty aspect inside the bond. Even at his level, even as large as that is, they've got almost 30%, 29.86% of the whole fund is actually in a cash position. And so we think about it for ourselves. Everybody wants to talk about the big investments they're doing on the top of the pyramid. And the reality is that foundation, that cash base, is what allows the rest of it to happen.
I did the same thing for the average kind of multi. So you look at family offices, right? So you have shared family offices. You have wealthy families that kind of share a family office structure. I mean, they have 20% in liquidity, and the idea is what liquidity does. Okay, so here, obviously, we've given this idea of, okay, there's purchase opportunities, and there's always going to be purchase opportunities. Okay, but liquidity essentially creates opportunities. So when you're going to purchase something or invest in something, okay, you have options to make the best decision. So what type of decisions exist in this kind of production phase, right? So in the production phase, within a family, okay, and most families, this doesn't exist. That's the funny thing.
Right.
College, usually kids have one option, okay? They have one option when they're buying a house. They have one option, right, when they're starting a career, right? They have one option when they're buying a car. They have one option when an opportunity to buy an investment property or buy a business. One option.
Why?
Because
Because they don't have that cash piece,
they
right?
don't. Families are not set up to work together.
Yeah.
And like I said, this is where if you're a grandparent, if you're a parent, this is where you can change the rest of your family's life. Like, you guys get to make a choice tonight. Your family can continue on and be faced with these single decisions, or you can change it.
Well, and think about this. When you're talking about that child and going back to the habits or lack of habits that happen in most families, because it's gotten so difficult for kids to get hired in other types of jobs and things, so they can't relate labor to the dollar like we were talking about earlier, that this actually helps us create. So when they get presented with, no, this school is going to cost $100,000 or it's going to cost $200,000, whatever how do they know what that even means? It's like, okay,
They don't
sign
know.
me up.
They don't know because so essentially all they've known here at 5 to 7 years old is no, we can't afford it.
Or the credit card.
No, we can't afford it. No, we can't afford it. But if they've learned, right, the value of money, what interest is, okay, they've learned that, hey, I can be creative and figure out ways to pay things back. Then it's translated into here. Then it's translated into here. Okay, now let's go look at these years. So let's bring up the calculator. And these, again, this is just 3 policies that started on a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, and 10-year-old.
Yep.
Okay,
And now then the 10-year-old is 3 years out of starting school, right? And let's say school's going to be $50,000 for the whole time frame. We simplified this a little bit rather than looking at each year. If we did it each year, it would be a little more efficient. But we just took chunks out of here. And so for education 1, we take $50,000 out. And with the idea, again, we're going to pay it back at what rate?
And who's going to pay it back?
The kid, ideally. Now, the parents might help, but the kid really should understand the value of it. What is going to happen with the child? It goes back to what we were talking about. Are they going to like that iPad more if they've had to pay for it? Are they going to understand it? How are they going to treat school?
Or it could be an incentive of, hey, if you get A's, we'll pay it.
Yeah.
Okay. If you get B's, we'll pay for the A's. You pay for the B's. Okay.
Yep.
We'll pay for grad school, you pay for undergrad, or vice versa.
Right. Right. And so here we just set it up, well, you pay it back over 10 years at 8%, and the next child does the same thing. The third child, when they get there, is the same thing over time. Now, they've got along, and all 3 of them decided they would like a house.
No, I don't want to do that yet.
Okay.
Let's do primary residence.
Okay. The calculator on it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about primary residence for just a second. So what does Kiyosaki say the primary residence is, an asset or a liability?
Most people don't know who Kiyosaki is.
Oh.
So I think he's disenfranchised more people than anything else.
But it's funny, that has become kind of an idea, and people think about with the house, and you can make that a lot bigger.
Yeah, I will.
People think about the house as, a costly thing that they live in. They have to pay taxes and other things, and so.
So step back, because I think home affordability, again, as we said before, it's like, because kids are put into this, you're off on your own. It's not. You're not. I mean, you're part of a family, but you're not part of a family.
Part of a new family, right?
You're right, where it's like you're on your own, and they have to kind of fend for themselves.
Yeah. So let's look at this on we'll do personal residence, and let's say it's a $500,000 house.
Sure. So this purpose of this calculator is what? Let's talk about the objective of this calculator first.
To find out if a couple of things. To find out the return on this investment, which is quite large.
Yeah.
What that's gonna do?
Is it worth buying a house? But also, if you have access to liquidity, right? Like Family Bank, if there's access to liquidity, is it worth purchasing a house? And also, it's like if there's liquidity within a family bank, right, you can look for deals, find deals, and now you can purchase it as a primary residence. And this is going to show whether, whether or not it's it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, let's make it. Let's make it 300.
Okay.
And the price of the property is 300 as well. Let's say we've got closing costs of about 10,000. It's probably on the high side, but let's leave it there. Okay. And now then when we go down to the mortgage information, the bank, depending on where we are, and we can get some deals as a first-time homeowner, right? Those kind of things. But let's say we were stuck in the 20% range. So basically, we could borrow $240,000 from the bank. And let's use current bank rates of 6.75 for a
primary residence.
Yep, on a 30-year note, so 360 months. And we're going to let's put in property taxes, and let's say property taxes are $500 a month. Insurance, $250. And let's do maintenance at $500 a month. And let's skip down here to income tax bracket, maybe 22%. Capital gains at 15%, which is going to be on the growth of the house. But we get an exemption currently of $250,000 each, or $500,000 total for a married couple. And let's look at a 10-year time frame, 120 months. And 120 on that one too. All right, now let's also put in closing costs or sales fees when we sell it, if we were to sell it, of say 6%. And so when we look at this, we see a huge negative here of 38% to the negative, and that's where a lot of financial gurus will talk about the primary mortgage or the primary house being really an anchor to everything else that's going on, a loss, right, or a liability.
And yeah. Looks like a liability, Todd.
Okay, well, let's look at a couple
So why
things.
did you build this calculator?
Let's look at the property appreciation rate. So what if it went along at a normal appreciation, not anything too crazy, like 3%? And that's better, but it's still, a significant problem of 14.43% to the negative.
Yep.
But what happens is, what we want to do often is find assets that do multi-purposes, right? Whenever we can do that, we can a lot of times get rid of costs. That's one of the reasons that we love whole life insurance, right? Because we have a death benefit, we have a cash account, we have a lot of pieces in there that we mentioned earlier that happen from one transaction versus having to do those all independently. Mm-hmm. Well, when we have a house, we have two things. We have an asset, sometimes called a liability, depending on who's talking about it, mm-hmm. and we have a place to live. And so if we don't buy the house, we have to pay rent. Right? What's it going to cost us to rent a $300,000 house? Probably $3,000 a month. Now then what we see is a net after tax 14.9%. Because again, we got the value of the house really for everything we were paying over what our rent cost would be as if we didn't do this.
Yep.
So that became a huge asset when we look at all of those ripples and everything together into what happens. And so we can look at it as a liability if we're only looking at the value of the house, but incorporating the fact that it also got rid of a rent cost, it becomes quite a valuable asset.
Now, in all fairness, right? So first off, where did the money come from, right? $70,000 is essentially the return on investment, right? For 14.9. Okay, but if it was borrowed, there is going to be a cost, right, to that money, right? So if you look at the down payment, right? So let's say that this was, because this is just the return on a primary investment. So let's say that this was the down payment came from the family bank.
Okay.
Right? So
we were going to pay 8% on it.
Yeah, or it could be half cash, half family bank money. Okay, so again, this is it becomes a more viable option than if it had to be just, hey, you're on your own, fend for yourself.
Right. Well, what if we borrowed 60,000? We came out of pocket with the 10.
Yep.
That's all. We're fresh out of school ish.
Yep.
Savings been kind of hard, and let's go down here to the second mortgage, and let's borrow $60,000 from the family bank at 8%, and we're going to pay this back over 20 years. Let's say. Our grandparents allowed. I mean, it could be any time frame, but maybe they just said, we want to see what you're going to do over 20 years.
Another thing that's cool is you could do this, live there for 5 years, and then rent it out and still be paying back the family bank.
Sublet it like the banks do.
Exactly.
And look what that did to our return.
Yep.
It doubled it.
Because again, your out of pocket's only $10,000.
That's right.
Yep. Anyway.
Yeah.
So.
And so paying 8%.
So this is this all comes from being able to establish that paradigm from 5 to 7 years old.
Yep.
So this is those productive years. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So the production years, this showed kind of real estate. So we call it wealth from the shadows. We kind of came up with that name. That was kind of a cool name. Kim didn't necessarily like the name. But wealth from the shadows basically means these are transactions that are going to happen. These are opportunities that you are facing right now. They're opportunities that your kids are facing, your grandkids are facing, and every one that will come from your progeny is going to face as well. So either these are what you're going to benefit from, or these are ones that you are going to essentially benefit other people. Yeah, because they're the ones that are going to capitalize on you, or you're going to capitalize on them.
Yeah, and the fact that they happen in the shadows is because so many people don't know that it's happening to them.
Nope.
Right? It's just out there, and it's like you said earlier about what happens to the kids that haven't been through this process of learning along the way. Once they get out of school, they have one option, right? They only have one thing they can do, and it's all in the shadows.
Okay, so we're an hour and a half into this. Let's just talk about a couple things with relation to this kind of final piece, because we talked about the real estate, in this kind of production phase of life, but let's maybe list out just a couple other transactions. So, and then we'll talk currents, which I think is going to be vital. Then we'll get into the app, and then I think we're good for the night.
Okay. Do you want to look at the bar, just see what the final is of how much money difference that is between that and using?
Let's do that first.
Using a cash account.
Yeah, let's do that first. I
think we should just quickly run through this because, here's the thing: could we do the family banking? Goes back to that question that was asked earlier. Without a life insurance policy.
Yeah,
we could. That's
point.
A separate strategy, right?
That's a great
but
point.
Let's see why we might want to do that. So in these examples, if we borrowed $60,000 each or $180,000 total for the 3 kids to buy a house. And then they decided, you know what? Because of this relationship that they've got, that the family bank brought the whole family together because it's a joint effort, they actually created and decided they wanted to go into business together. Where are they going to get money to start this business? Again, back to the family bank. And all that's being paid back. And because it's being paid back, it becomes available again and again and again and again. And so what happens is, interesting, because we're paying this back at 8%, if the policy had been left alone at this point in time, the policy would be worth combined about $1 million, $1,018,000 based on the current illustration. Because of that process of paying these loans back at 8%, it actually ends up having $1,342,000 in there, which is going to be more money for the family bank to continue more operations. Maybe for the business, it means adding another building, maybe expanding and creating even more cash flow to create those policies for that next generation, right? But what if we didn't use the life insurance policy? We said, you know what? I don't want to pay 5.5% to the life insurance company. I'm going to put it in a high yield savings account and not do the whole life insurance policy. So let's bring up that last borrowing strategy.
Is it 3?
Yep. All right. So the same cash flows, the $15,000, but now then when we look at education.
So this is just paying in and withdrawing?
That's correct.
Okay.
We created a savings account, and we have a savings account earning 5.5%. Turn off the tax for just a minute, if you would. We have a high yield savings account earning 5.5%, and we're just using that as a fund, which is part of what Dave Ramsey talks about and other people. Stay away from the banks and instead create this fund that you take money from and put money back into. Right?
So you just put it in the bank, and the bank gets to lend it.
Yeah. All right, but let's see what that looks like. We have the next education, the third child. Again, the same payments, the same cash flows that we were talking about in the previous example, and the business. And what happens here is we run a little short.
Oof.
And rather than having $1,340,000, we only have $970. But that's assuming that we didn't have to pay income taxes on our high yield 5.5%. Savings account. If we have to pay taxes on this account, so turn on the tax bracket.
So that's what they're hoping for there, so they can pay Samuel Jackson's fee for running up the credit card.
That's the Capital One move, right? But see, we're at $646,000. So it's not that we can't do it with another type of account. It's just that the life insurance policy really works well.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right, let's list. Let's make a list of these those final transactions.
Okay.
Then call it a night. All right. I mean, if you look at the business side, I mean that's one thing, but I think unifying a family is another. One of the cool things that we did in the July live stream is Kim had this video of that family credit union. So, and that was an old, really old video, but it was kind of I think it was 2 generations past or 1 generation where the grandparents actually got a credit union license.
Yeah.
Right. And they established a credit union where the only members were the family.
Yeah.
And they had kind of a board, and they just lent to the family, and it made a huge difference.
Yep.
Okay. Let's list some transactions, and then
Okay.
Then we'll talk about the prototypes. We'll kind of demonstrate maybe one of them, and then be on our merry way.
I think, it's funny. Mathematically and from the standpoint of monetary value, obviously the bank was huge. But I think to me, the biggest thing that was established was those early principles on understanding the value of dollars. And I think that was taught really during that accumulation phase when the children were young and they were buying iPads
100%.
and bicycles and all of that. That's really what set them up for life.
Well,
and that's where the legacy was actually incorporated, right?
That's the thing is you look at so the point we brought up is the way in which commerce is happening right now. People think it's different. It's not different. I mean, it is, but it's not. Like how things were happening a couple hundred years ago. Yeah, what we're buying now is totally different. Okay.
The way we're doing it.
But the way we're buying it is the same thing. It's the same damn thing.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at, I would say the big purchases, okay, that I really feel that families, right, would benefit from integrating this into their family network. So you have vehicles, real estate, and I'm also going to say something else, is the paradigm that you establish within families isn't necessarily just a means of purchasing and avoiding lending traps, right? The one from Chrysler, right? But you also start to identify deals, right? Because I mean, the one I talked about in the book, the heads I win, tails you lose, is the Jeep, which I actually was forced to sell to by my wife. But a guy that I went to the gym with had this really cool black Jeep, and he was getting married, and his fiance told him, kind of in jest, that she wouldn't marry him unless he sold the Jeep.
And that was way back in, like when they were first dating, right?
Yeah, first dating. Yeah. And a couple days before they were getting married, she's like, "I'm not marrying you." And so he was like, "I got to sell this today." I'm like, "I'll buy it today." Right. And I bought a $30,000 Jeep for 20 grand because I had cash. Right. But we had a client, and he, really wealthy client. It's the biggest policy loan we ever processed, which was almost $3 million. And he bought this lot at an insane discount with a policy loan because he was able to close
at
on
the
it.
time.
And then he took out, a mortgage, the traditional way. But it's not just the fact that you're buying it, but you're able to have liquidity. Again, it's the Berkshire Hathaway, it's family offices. When you have liquidity, you can buy at discount and then go and finance in, the most effective way or efficient way.
Right. And at the same time, you're also going to buy stuff in the most efficient way, right? Are those kids, when they attribute labor to the price of the iPad or whatever else, are they going to buy it at the highest price? Or are they going to look around and say, wait a second, let me find the best price I can because it costs me X amount of time to get there?
Yep. So I would say also, vacation. There's a lot of, is vacation an expense? It's an expense, but it's also an investment, right? I would say family is the most important thing in life. Having experience with family, those memories, that's what life is about. But how much is sacrificed for the sake of money, right? And so looking at meaningful ways to pay for this, like that's another function of a family bank, is doing it in a successful way, profitable way. Home improvement, vehicles, and teaching kids along the way is also insanely valuable. Business, education. Okay, and I think looking at just these alone, I think we've demonstrated already, will outperform any traditional investment retirement strategy
Without the risk.
And these are what is already being done anyway.
Right.
Okay. All right, let's look at a couple of our applications. So what we've done, and these are, like I said, prototypes. Some of this is being built into, is going to be built into our portal. But we've established essentially a way where you can use this to put in a loan. I'll just do an example really quick. So put a car loan, Donahoe Bank, Patrick. We'll do today $10,000. Say let's do 60. We'll do new Jeep.
That was 20,000.
It will be this would be denied by the board, the Donahoe board. Okay, and this will create a simple loan agreement. Like I said, the board will deny this, but I'll do my best. It'll create an amortization schedule. Download PDF.
That can be printed out.
Yep.
And there's no question. Everybody has the documentation.
Yep.
There's the only way that the process is going to continue on and continue on and continue on, right?
Yep. Exactly. Okay, and then the other side of it is essentially a GPT that we built, because if you look at the traditional family bank function, it was an integration into an estate plan. And so we built this because if you have your estate planning set up, I built this so that you can essentially modify your estate plan so that your trustee will be directed to establish a family bank, whether it's the principles, the values, the bylaws, so that they can establish it in your estate plan so that money will be carved out. So this will direct the entire creation process. And so both of these are available to you. They're in prototype form. We will, of course, be doing some prototyping, getting some feedback before they're finalized. So all of this will be available in your workbook. And I hope you guys will use them and comment when we request feedback. Hopefully, you get back to us. So. All right, everyone. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up, but we're going to be doing kind of a V2 of this. We'll be recapping, but also doing some additional education on some of the family bank principles in just a couple of weeks. But really appreciate everyone for staying on tonight. This has been fun. This has been fun for us. We had a lot of fun kind of preparing some of the material. Sorry Kim wasn't available to be here tonight. I'm sure it would have been even better.
Way better.
Way better. But really appreciate you guys being on. We'll go ahead and take some time and answer some questions. Joe, do you want to put some questions on the board, and we'll take a few minutes to answer those?
Oh, we didn't talk about currents.
Dang, we didn't talk about currents. Okay. Holy cow! Like, what? There was not a better setup.
Yeah, we forgot something that just added in.
Yeah, we forgot something that yeah.
Yeah, what I would
talk about?
Yeah, what I would say is, this was all really cool theory that we talked about tonight.
Yep.
But none of this is going to happen if there's not a system in place. It just didn't. There's human nature gets in the way. You've provided some of that system with that tremendous tool that you gave, the calculator, to be able to figure out the amortization schedule and those pieces. But really, something like currents. Currents is what's going to pull that stuff back from the shadows and actually really impact the saving side of what happens.
Yeah, and this is an app that's actually free for both clients of Kim's and also clients of Paradigm Life. So there's a link in the workbook. This is an app that was inspired by a colleague of ours. It was also directed in a sense by behavioral economists. It isn't, I'm not going to call it a budgeting app, because budgeting is it's not even my opinion, but budgeting engages an ineffective part of the brain. Obviously tonight we talked about a productive way in which you establish good habits, good systems, good rituals. Currents is essentially an app that engages the part of the brain that is positive, and it's free for all clients. And so if you click on, or if you scan the QR code, you can get access to it. It's undergoing constant improvements, and so it is essentially we call it a spending strategy. And as you integrate it, it's revolutionary, and more to come on that. So,
yeah, great question.
Yes, thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah, the mechanism. The mechanism is somewhat of a broad term, but the app that you just saw is essentially a prototype. It doesn't have a database associated with it. It's more of a document creator, but we're going to get feedback as far as how that is used. But ultimately, there'll be a database, loan management, and so that's the ultimate goal. Okay, looks like that is it.
That's it, huh?
Okay.
No more questions.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for really making a priority of your family to spend this time and learn and grow and help us improve what it is that we have to offer in that quest, right?
Yep. Yeah, and like we said in the beginning, there will be the ability to invite others that aren't necessarily clients of Paradigm Life. So look out for some information regarding that. But I believe it's our next live stream is in 2 weeks, and can't wait to see you then. Really appreciate you being on tonight, and cheers to you. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.